Okay, so we're going to do one last thing here with these intro videos. We're just going to play with player movement really quick, okay? So what we need to do here is first on our ball sprite, so we got two different balls. So this is my awesome looking ball. What I'm going to do is I'm going to rename that to, player, okay? And then make sure it's got a rigid body. So it's got some physics, so we can move and it'll do calculations. Where is it next frame? Where is it? Okay, it's going there with this force and so on. And then it's got some sort of body, so it can hit things, so it doesn't just fall through everything. Okay. The other thing is we need at least one other thing in the scene to have a body that it can hit into. For us, that was our grass sprite, so I'm going to rename this to ground. Okay. Sky sprite, I'm going to rename that to background image. Okay. And then the ball sprite, I'm going to rename to other player. Okay. So player, what we're going to do is either click on add component, and to create a new script, we could either click new script and type in a name, or we can just type in a name, like I'll name my script player controller, and if I hit enter, it'll say, do you want to create and add that to your player? I could do that. And what that does is that automatically adds a new script to your player, and over here created a new file that was your script. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and remove that just to show you another way you can do it. So let's delete that. And then what I want to do over here is I'm going to create a new folder called, you don't have to, but I like to stay organized. So right now I'm going to do a couple things. I'm going to create a folder for my scripts. I'm going to create a folder for my scenes, and I'm going to drag my main scene in there. I already got a sprites folder, so I'm going to drag my ball sprite in there just so it's all organized. And then the scripts, I'm going to double click on it. You can always go up to assets right here on the left. So I'm going to go into my scripts folder and I'm going to go create a new C# script. Okay. So as soon as you click off of this, it now creates the script. So you can see over here the class's name matches the file name. So if you now rename this to player controller, that's not going to match over here. So when you open this up, you're going to get an error. As soon as you try and save it, it's going to say the class and the file name don't match. However, that error message looks. So now if I try and go Control S, save it, and then I go back to my scene and I click play, it's going to, oh, it's not attached to anything. So I don't get an error message. But we want to rename that class to player controller. Otherwise, we won't be able to use this in our scene. Okay, so I'm going to save it now, or better yet, what I can do is I can just delete it completely because it was empty anyways, and just create a new C# script. And I'm going to call this one player controller. And when I hit enter, notice that, oh, it was zoomed out to the right. Sorry, a little typo there. Let's try that one more time. Okay, so create a new C# script. And whoa, that's weird. I don't know why it's all the way to the right so you couldn't see all these words. But if we highlight all this, we just get rid of that. And we go, I want to name it player controller. And so when you hit enter, you'll notice over here now the class has the right name. That's just a common mistake for beginners. Okay, so I'm going to double click it. I like using mono develop. If the default is for you different, you can always go over here and go edit preferences and external tools, and right here you can choose oh, this is different than it used to be. Script editor, yeah, internal, I don't know, this is totally new. I used to use a different version. Anyways, mine opens up to mono develop. I can help you figure out if it opens up to Visual Studio. Okay, so anyways, going back over here, I've got the script where I can type whatever I want, but it's not attached to anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this onto my player and let go. Now when I click on my player, it still has position, rotation, all that. That's a transform. It still shows up as an image, sprite renderer. It has physics, calculations. It can, fall. And then it has a collider, so it has a body so that it can hit things. And now it has my script. Now this script is totally empty, so I'm going to go down here and click Edit Script, or I can double click on it over here. Because this is attached, any changes I make will be referenced when I click the play mode. So in here, you can get rid of these collections. I just leave them in there. A lot of that is dealing with arrays and things like that, but I'll just leave it in there for now. A lot of the Unity engine commands come from this, so we'll pretty much always leave this in here unless you're writing a separate script, not based in Unity, but just like, say you made a new thing called a tile for your game. It has nothing to do with Unity. It's just holding your data and your methods. Then you don't need that. But in general, leaving that up there is fine for now. Okay. So what we've got is a start method and an update method. There's tons of other ones that you can write in, but the most basic is when this game object is created, it runs the start method. Okay, so for us, since it's in the scene, that means as soon as I hit the play mode. So that's a good place to initialize things, give starting values, set things up, grab access to, find game objects in the scene. But right now, I'm just going to delete that. We don't need any starting values. And then update is called once per frame. So there's no, that's completely based on frame rate. So it could go faster or slower. Often when you do physics, what you want to do is do void fixed update. And what fixed update is the same thing as update, where it's called very often, except this will change if a lot's going on. Your computer might slow down or speed up. And so if you're applying a force over like more frames really fast, then more force is going to get added and it will move faster than if the same force is added only 3 times because it's going slower, then it's going to move less. So basically when we do physics, we use fixed update because it takes an increment, like so let's say 0.2 seconds, and every frame is called every 0.2 seconds regardless of how fast the frame rates are called. And so often whenever we do physics, we go in here. For a beginner, you can just put everything in update if you want. Okay, so I'm going to do everything in update, which is a bad habit for physics, but for beginners, it's fine. Okay, so in my script, it's attached to my player. Right now it has nothing. Anything I put up here that's public, I will be able to access from the Unity engine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go public float, so it's just a decimal number, and I'm going to call it my movement force. Okay, because later, I want to be able to use a movement force just in Unity and be able to decide like, oh, that's not enough force, that's more, that's less. I want that to be adjustable. So I'm going to save that. And now when I go back over here, as long as there's no typos in my code, this will show up as movement force. Now default is 0 unless over here I set it to a value. But because this is public, you're essentially relinquishing control to Unity. You can still in update change it, of course, and use it and so on. But that public lets Unity engine in here have access. So what I'm going to do is I don't know, start it at 10. I'm just totally making that up. Okay. Then I'm going to go in here. And what I want to do is I want to be able to control the physics. I want to be able to move it around. So I need to have access to this rigid body. Now there's a couple ways you could do that. Okay. The easiest way for beginners is make a public. Of what type is it going to be? Well, what type is the component? It's a rigid body 2D. So let's start typing. It's of type rigid body. Oh, no auto completions? That's terrible. So for most of you, this will be auto completing for you, but I'm going to say it's of type rigid body 2D. I know how the capitals go. Okay. If it was wrong, it would show up as red. Mine's being a little glitchy right now, but we'll do R body. There we go. Now this is just the name of the variable. You could have named it anything you want. Okay. So now I'm going to save this. I'm going to go down here. And again, if there's no errors in my code, this will come up. If there's an error, you'll see it down in this bar down here. But there's no error. So up comes my public R body. Again, if I go over here and I go, this is my physics thingy, and save it, and then go back over here, this with some lag will show up that this will now be called physics thingy, because it's just a variable name, right? So in here, nothing is there right now. If I could somehow grab this and drag it down there, that'd be great. And that's often what you could do by like clicking on another object. It won't let me drag this in because this is a game object and this is looking for a rigid body 2D. So the way you get that, so I'm going to click on my player again, is this little target next to it. Lets you click and select. Now there's only one rigid body in this entire scene. So the only one I can click is the player's rigid body. Later on, what we'll do instead, just to mention it, you don't need to use it now, is we'll go, oh, I want my physics thingy to be equal to, and then we used get component. And then what that does is that grabs the component from either this thing or you reference some other game object somehow, right? Like you public or you find it or whatever, and then you go dot from that or on that game object, get component of type rigid body 2D. And there we go. So that's another way to get the access. That's in general how we'll do it. However, for now, we can just use a public because we're just beginning out, okay? So I created a public number, so I can set that number in here. I created a public physics thingy, so now I can grab my player's thing, and now I have access to just push it, roll it, shoot it, bounce it, whatever I want. So I'm just going to write 2 lines of code, okay? What I'm going to do in here is I'm just going to get the user input, just left and right, and then I'm going to push the ball accordingly. Okay, so my 2 lines here is, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a float. Okay, I'm creating a new variable. I'm going to call it horizontal input. Okay, and so that's just any variable. I just created the name. It's a decimal. And I'm going to do from the input class, I'm going to get axis. There's also get axis raw, but what this does is this gets a value from -1 to +1. If they're pressing right, it's going to be +1. If they're pressing left, it'll be -1. If they're not pressing anything, it's going to be 0. And then the get axis has all the decimals in between. So if they're using a joystick controller, they might be 0.7 to the right. If you use get axis raw, that's only going to give you the -1, 0, or 1. Okay, and that can definitely be useful, especially in 2D games. That's really common. Okay. So here I'm going to do this, and then you pass in a string. And over here you have a list. So if you go to project setting input, here are all the axes you can get. So you can get the mouse X, you can get the jump buttons, you can get all this. I'm going to get the horizontal. And if I look at this, the left and right keys work, but also the alternate ones are the A and D. So WASD work for left and right. And then here you can change gravity, speed, sensitivity, all those sorts of things. Okay, so I'm going to click back on my player. Oh, not my player. I'm going to go back to the script. And so I'm going to get the axis for horizontal. If you misspell it, you'll get an error like that axis isn't, if I like, put horizontal, then when I try and run it, it'll say that axis isn't set up. So it's just a typo. So we need to type it just right. Okay, so now I've got the -1, 0 to 1, what the user's pressing left and right. So now all I need to do is use that to push the character. So what I'm going to do is from my rigid body, so the way I have access to it is right here. So I'm going to type physics thingy. Okay. And from that, I'm going to dot add force. Okay. And so now when I add force, what that does is that says I'm going to push something in a direction. And the way we handle directions is with a vector. So for math, you get a vector of like an x comma y. And that's not only, the yield, that's not only a direction, but it's also a magnitude. So I could go over 1 and up 1. And so that's a diagonal of 1.4 square root of 2. And that's a 45-degree angle of a 1.4 force. If I go over 2 up 2, that's the same direction. It's still over 2 up 2, same slope, same 45-degree angle, but it's now twice as far or twice as much the force that you're adding. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this. I'm going to take the standard right direction. So an easy way to reference that is vector2.right. You could also create a new vector2 and put in just 1 comma 0. That's another way to do it. That's a little clunkier to me. So I'm going to go vector2.right. So it's literally just right 1, up and down 0. Okay. So I'm going to take that. I'm going to multiply it by my horizontal input, which is the value I just got right here. So what that does is now if they pressed right, then it adds a force of 1 to the right. If they press nothing, it adds a force of 0 times the vector right, which is 0, so it adds no force if they don't press anything. And then if they press left, it adds a force of the right direction arrow times -1, which is the left arrow, right? A positive 1x times -1 goes -1x. So this will exactly do what we want, except the only thing is the force is 1, which is really weak. So what we want to do is be able to adjust that. So this is the right force in the right direction. All we need to do is say we want to have the power to have some strength. So I'm going to multiply it by the movement force, okay? So the direction times the input will give us the correct direction, force, everything's right, except we want to be able to control the speed. So now I click save, I click play mode, let's see if I have any errors. No errors, great, okay? So now I'm going to click on my scene. If I'm clicked elsewhere, nothing happens when I press left and right. But if I click on my game view, I press right, and oh my gosh, oh, there's a little shadow I hadn't noticed. So now it rolls just like I want it to. And while it's in play mode, again, this won't save, but I can click in here and be like, what if this was gigantic? And then I click back in here and, oh dang! And then I could also go to physics and I can be like, what if this was a really heavy ball? And I'm like, oh, force is not stopping it. What if it was a super light ball? Oh, it's already fallen. Let's go to the scene view. So a cool trick is if you click on a game object and then hover over the scene and click F, you'll focus on it. Whoa, this is down at -1,000 already, and it is just speeding up. The rotation is going crazy. I could zoom out. Whoa, it is so far gone. But as soon as I click off play mode, boom, everything gets reset. So this is now right where I wanted it. I can zoom in, zoom out, etc. Okay, so that's it for the second video. Again, this code I will just highlight if you want to just look at it and leave it up on pause, okay? But yeah, next video, I'll talk a little bit more, maybe like a jump force and some other things you can do with physics, like adding some materials, okay?